You will sleep with me tonight, three giant Apache girls said, lone famer. John Harmon had always preferred the peace of his isolated farm, nestled at the edge of a small, quiet town. The fields stretched endlessly, the trees whispered in the wind, and the sound of the creek flowing nearby was the only music he needed. For years, this simple life had been his refuge. No distractions, no complications, just him, his work, and the vast wilderness around him. But on one particularly hot afternoon as John was working the fields, something caught his eye, something out of the ordinary. In the distance, three figures appeared. At first, John thought they were just shadows, perhaps a trick of the sun's glare on the horizon. But as they drew closer, he realized that they were women, tall, powerful, and moving with a purpose. John stood up, wiping sweat from his brow, his gaze locked on them as they approached his farm. They were unlike any women he had ever seen. Their posture was commanding, their stride steady, and there was an undeniable strength in their every movement. The tallest of the three, a woman with striking dark eyes, met his gaze, and a shiver ran down John's spine. Her presence was magnetic, almost otherworldly. As they drew near, John's first instinct was to retreat, to run back to his house and bar the doors, but something in the air made him pause. There was no threat in their eyes, no malice, just an intensity that demanded respect. The leader of the group, a woman who stood at least a foot taller than John, spoke first. Her voice was deep and carried a strength that mirrored her stature. "You will sleep with me tonight," she said calmly, as though it were an undeniable fact. John was stunned. He had no idea how to respond. Brace. His mind raced with questions. Who were these women? What did they want? He had heard stories of the Apache tribes in the area. But these women seemed different. There was a mystique about them, something he couldn't place. The second woman, with long dark braids, smiled faintly as if understanding John's confusion. The third woman, her eyes sharp like an eagle's, stood silently watching him carefully, as if gauging his every move. There was something in the way they moved together, almost like a single unit, perfectly in sync. John's throat tightened. The idea of these women, powerful and mysterious, standing before him, demanding something he wasn't prepared for, made his heart race. But yet, despite the confusion, he couldn't deny the strange pull they had on him. It was as if something inside him whispered that this was meant to be. His hand trembled slightly as he wiped the sweat from his brow again. I don't understand, John stammered, his voice shaky. The leader took a step closer. Her gaze never left his. There's no need for you to understand, she said, her voice smooth yet commanding. We've come for you. You are a part of this, whether you realize it or not. John's mind was spinning. He had never been one to entertain thoughts of anything beyond his simple, solitary life. His relationships had always been few, and those that existed had always been fleeting. He couldn't fathom what was happening. These women, whoever they were, didn't fit into the world he knew. And yet, here they were, making demands without question. Why me? John asked, his voice a little more steady now. Samia's eyes narrowed, and for the first time she seemed to soften. You will find out in time. But for now, we need you.
John didn't know what to make of her words.
They seemed to hold some kind of truth, but it was as if the meaning eluded him, just out of reach. Despite himself, a small part of him was drawn to the mystery of it all. These women had come for a reason, and he was the key to something, even though he didn't know what. Will you come with us? Samia asked, the question still carrying an air of authority. John hesitated. Is Life had been so straightforward, so predictable that the idea of stepping into the unknown felt both terrifying and exhilarating.
The quiet of his farm had kept him safe from the world, but perhaps, just perhaps, this moment was the beginning of something new.
His instincts, ever reliable in the fields, told him to trust the moment. With a deep breath, John nodded slowly. "Okay," he said, his voice a little stronger than before.
Samia smiled, and the other women exchanged glances, as if they had expected this answer all along.
They didn't speak another word as they led John away from his farm, into the vast, untamed wilderness beyond. The forest, dense and dark, seemed to welcome them like an old friend, its branches stretching toward the sky. The air grew cooler as they walked deeper into the trees, the distant calls of animals the only sound that accompanied them. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, painting the world in shades of orange and purple, John couldn't help but wonder what was in store for him. He had entered a world he knew nothing about, and yet, for the first time in his life, he felt a sense of purpose. The women, though mysterious and somewhat intimidating, carried an air of power that John couldn't deny. They had come for him, and he was now bound to them in a way he couldn't explain. Mia led the way, her tall form moving effortlessly through the underbrush. The other two women, though slightly less imposing, were no less captivating. They moved with a grace that defied their size, their steps light despite their powerful frames. Round. In desperate moves, they arrived at a small clearing where the moonlight shone down, casting a silver glow over the scene. Mia turned to John. "This is where we will stay tonight," she said, her tone final. "We need to rest, and so do you." It was strange, this place, both wild and serene, untamed and peaceful at once. He felt like an intruder in a world he didn't belong to, but there was no turning back now. The women set up camp quickly, as though they had done this 1,000 times before. A fire was started, and John was soon seated by it, watching as the women moved about with ease, preparing food, speaking to each other in a language he didn't understand. Smea watched him quietly, her expression unreadable, as if she was waiting for something. John was still trying to process everything. His mind swirled with questions about these women, about their purpose, and about what would happen next. But in the quiet of the night, as the fire crackled and the world seemed to hold its breath, he knew that this was only the beginning. And for the first time in a long while, John felt a spark of excitement, of possibility. The road ahead was unclear, but one thing was certain: it would be unlike anything he had ever known. The night passed slowly for John. The fire crackled and popped, sending sparks into the cool night air, but his mind raced. But he couldn't shake the feeling that his life had just shifted in a way he didn't fully understand. The women had set up camp in the clearing, and he sat alone by the fire trying to make sense of everything that had happened. Mia, the tallest and most commanding of the group, had led him here. But for what purpose? What did they want from him? As the firelight flickered in the darkness, John noticed the strength in their movements, the way they worked together seamlessly. There was no arguing or confusion among them. It was as if they had been doing this for years. The other two women were just as striking, though their demeanor was more reserved than Samia's. Still, there was something about them that intrigued John, something that made him feel both nervous and fascinated. After a while, Samia approached John, her eyes locked on his. She stood tall, her presence undeniable, as if the very air around her bent to her will.
"You're wondering why we've come," she said, her voice smooth and calm, but tinged with something deeper, something John couldn't place.
John nodded, his voice tight. "Yes. I don't understand. Why me?" "Why, my farm?" Studied him for a moment, her dark eyes calculating. "You will understand in time." she replied. But for now, you must trust us. Trust that this is the path you were meant to take. John shifted uncomfortably on the ground. He wanted to ask more questions, but something in the way she spoke told him that pushing for answers would not make her give them any faster. Breathe. Instead, he stayed silent, watching the fire as the flames danced and flickered. The other two women who had been preparing the camp joined them by the fire. One of them, a woman with long, dark braids, sat down beside John, her gaze soft but still intense. She didn't speak immediately, but when she did, her voice was gentle, almost soothing. "We are the last of our people," she said, her words carrying a weight that made John feel the gravity of the situation. "Our tribe has been scattered, lost to time. But we have not forgotten who we are, and we have not forgotten our duty." John looked at her, his curiosity growing. "What duty?" he asked. Sammy answered for her, her voice still firm. "We were sent to find something. Someone. Your bloodline carries the key to what we seek. We have come to you because it is your destiny to help us restore what was lost. Bray." John's heart began to pound in his chest, round in despair. His mind struggled to grasp what they were saying. His family had been farmers for generations, simple, quiet lives far removed from any grand legacy. There was no mention of anything significant in his ancestry, no old stories about heroic ancestors or great deeds. He was just John Harmon, a lonely farmer. But there was something in Semia's gaze, something in the way she spoke, that made him wonder, could it be true?
Could he really be connected to something much bigger than his simple life? The second woman, with sharp eyes and a quieter presence, spoke now.
"The world is changing," she said, her voice low. "Our people are scattered, broken. But there are those who would see us destroyed completely. We must act before it's too late." John swallowed hard. He had heard rumors of conflict between various tribes and the government, of land disputes and battles that were far from the peaceful life he had led. But he never imagined he could be a part of anything so significant. He felt like a stranger to the world these women spoke of, a world filled with ancient traditions, survival, and a struggle for something much larger than any farm or town. "Why me?" he repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. Maya looked at him closely, her expression softening just a little. "Because your blood runs deeper than you know, John Harmon. Your ancestors were not just farmers. They were warriors, protectors of something sacred. And that blood is in you." John couldn't understand. He had never felt anything more than the weight of the daily grind. The back-breaking work of tilling the soil, tending to the cattle, and fixing fences. What was this legacy they spoke of? What was this connection to something ancient, something forgotten? The woman with the braids seemed to sense his confusion. "You are the last of your kind, John," she said. "The last of the line that can help us. We need you to help us restore what was lost, to bring back what was once ours. Your role is not clear yet, but it will be. Trust in that." As she spoke, John's thoughts raced. He had always felt something different about his life, something that didn't quite match the world around him. He had always felt disconnected, as if he didn't belong in the small town or on the quiet farm. Could it be that there was more to his life than he had ever realized? Could this strange encounter be the key to unlocking something larger than himself? "Where do we go from here?" John asked, his voice steady now. He didn't know what he was agreeing to, but something told him that the decision was already made. He had already taken the first step, and there was no turning back. Samia nodded, as if she had been waiting for him to ask that question. We stay here for tonight. Tomorrow we begin our journey. You'll learn what you need to know. John looked up at the sky. The stars were clearer than he had ever seen them before, as if the night was holding its breath. A cool breeze stirred the leaves of the trees, and the world seemed vast, open, and full of possibility. It was as though the night was waiting too, waiting for him to take the next step. For the first time, John didn't feel alone in the world. He didn't feel like just another man working the land. He felt like part of something larger, something that had been waiting for him, whether he realized it or not. The fire crackled again, breaking his thoughts. The women around him seemed to settle in, preparing for the journey ahead. Samia sat beside him, her gaze never leaving him. There was a sense of quiet understanding between them, an unspoken bond that was beginning to form. John still didn't understand everything. But as the night stretched on, he knew one thing for certain. His life had just changed in ways he couldn't begin to comprehend. And no matter what happened next, he was no longer just a farmer. He was part of something ancient and important. The morning arrived slowly, as if the world itself was still waking from the night's quiet slumber. The fire from the night before had burned down to glowing embers, and the air was cool and crisp. John had hardly slept, his mind still reeling from the events of the night before. The strange women, their mysterious purpose, and the cryptic words they had spoken filled his thoughts. He had always lived a simple life, one defined by the rhythm of the seasons, the needs of his farm, and the occasional visit to town for supplies. But now, everything felt different. The weight of what had been said, of the promises and questions, pressed on him like the air before a storm. Samia stood at the edge of the clearing, her silhouette outlined against the early morning sky. She looked up at the sky, her eyes thoughtful, her posture strong and unyielding. She had been watching the sunrise for some time now, as if contemplating something only she could understand. The other two women who had been quiet the night before were now gathering their things, preparing for the journey ahead. They moved with purpose, no words needed between them, each one knowing exactly what to do. John sat on the ground, his back against a tree, watching them. He hadn't asked much overnight, still unsure of what to make of the situation, but now the silence was too much. His questions burned inside him, unanswered and growing. Samia turned toward him, her eyes meeting his with an intensity that made his chest tighten. Are you ready to leave?
She asked, her voice calm but firm. John wasn't sure if he was ready.
The life he knew was here, on this land, with the animals and the soil he had worked for so long. It was a life of certainty, a life that made sense, even if it was lonely. But the path before him, this strange new world with these women, was calling to him in a way he couldn't ignore. I don't know what's ahead, John replied, his voice quieter than usual. But I know I can't stay here. Not anymore. Samia gave him a small nod, as if she had expected him to say that. Good, she said simply. The journey will not be easy, but it is necessary. Breath. And we will need you with us. The road ahead is long, and what you will learn will change everything. John stood up, brushing the dirt from his pants, and watched as the three women gathered their things. Samia had a quiet authority about her, a sense of purpose that John could feel in every word she spoke. Her companions, though less outspoken, were no less formidable. They seemed to share the same quiet strength, and John could see the bond between them, something unspoken but strong, like a team of warriors united by a common cause. As the group set off, John walked beside them, his heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and uncertainty. They moved through the dense woods with ease, the tall trees and thick brush barely slowing them down. The path they walked seemed familiar to them, as if they had traveled it before. But John couldn't shake the feeling that he was far from the life he had once known. The air was cooler here, the trees thicker, the world more alive with every step. The further they traveled, the more the landscape began to change. The soft green of the forest gave way to rocky terrain, the ground uneven beneath their feet. The women navigated the rugged path with ease, while John struggled to keep up. His legs, unaccustomed to such travel, ached from the effort, but he pushed on, determined to keep pace with them. Every now and then Samia would glance over her shoulder, her expression unreadable, but her pace never faltered. Eventually they reached a small river, its waters clear and fast-moving, cutting through the landscape like a scar. The sound of rushing water filled the air, and John could feel the cool mist against his face. The women stopped at the edge, each of them dipping their hands into the water, as if to drink from it, or perhaps to cleanse themselves in its flow. "We are close," Samia said, her voice low and serious. "Best. This river marks the border of our land. Beyond it lies what we have been searching for." John felt a shiver run down his spine. The air here seemed different, charged with something ancient, something that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. He looked around, but all he saw was the wilderness, untamed and wild. The land seemed to stretch forever, and yet it felt as if they were standing on the edge of something vast, something unknown. "Where are we going?" John asked, his voice steady but his curiosity evident. Samia didn't answer immediately. Instead, she turned to the other two women, exchanging a brief look before turning back to John. "We are heading to a place called Heath," she said finally. "It is where our people once lived before they were scattered. It is where our strength lies and where our legacy can be reclaimed." The word Kamik echoed in John's mind. It was a name he had never heard before, and yet it felt familiar in a way he couldn't explain. It was as if the word itself carried meaning that had been hidden from him for so long. "What is it?" John asked, his voice barely a whisper. Tamia's gaze softened, but her tone remained serious. "It is the heart of our people. It is where we were born and where we will be reborn." John felt a deep pull at his chest, as though the words were calling to something inside him that he had never known existed. His mind raced with questions, but he held them back. There was something in Samia's eyes, something ancient, that told him he would learn more when the time was right. And right now, it wasn't time to ask more. The women continued their journey, and John walked beside them, feeling the weight of the world shift on his shoulders. The path ahead seemed uncertain, but it was a path that had been set for him long before he had ever realized it. The more he traveled with them, the more he understood that his life was no longer his own. He was part of something larger, something tied to these women, to their past, and to the legacy they were trying to reclaim. As they moved forward, John couldn't help but wonder what lay ahead. What was this place they were seeking? What role did he play in it? And most importantly, could he really help them restore what had been lost? The journey had only just begun, but already John could feel the change in the air. The world around him felt different, and he knew that whatever was coming next would reshape everything he thought he knew about his life. There was no turning back now. The path had been set, and all he could do was follow. The journey continued as John walked beside Samia and the two other women, their steps steady as they moved through the rugged landscape. The days began to blur together, one leading into the next, each filled with travel, quiet conversations, and the ever-present pull of uncertainty. John had been accustomed to the slow, predictable rhythms of farm life, but now every step seemed to carry him further away from the life he knew. They passed through dense forests and wide plains, crossing rivers and scaling hills that seemed to stretch endlessly into the horizon. The women led the way, their movements fluid, as if they had walked these paths many times before. John, though determined, struggled to keep up. His legs were sore, his body not used to the physical strain of this kind of journey, but he pushed on, his curiosity growing with every step. Each day brought new questions, and with each passing moment, John felt a deeper connection to the mysterious women guiding him. Samia rarely spoke, but when she did, it was always with purpose. She shared stories of her people, of the great tribe that had once lived in these lands. Her voice was strong and steady. And though her words were often cryptic, John could feel the weight of history in them. The other two women, though quieter, would sometimes share their thoughts as well, offering glimpses into the world they had come from. "We are the last," Samia had said one evening as they sat around a fire. "The last of a people who once ruled these lands. But we were scattered, hunted, and forgotten. Our ancestors' strength was lost, and we were forced to hide."
John had listened intently, his mind racing with the possibilities.
He had never thought of these women as anything other than strangers at first, but now he saw them as something more, something deeply connected to the land, to history, and to something greater than anything he could comprehend. As they continued on their journey, John began to notice the subtle changes in the world around them. The air grew heavier with each passing day, the sky darker, as if the very landscape was holding its breath. The women seemed to notice these changes too, their expressions growing more serious, their movements quicker and more purposeful. Samia, who had been the most reserved of the three, began to speak more often, her words carrying a sense of urgency. "We are close now," she said one afternoon as they approached a narrow pass between two towering cliffs.
Kaiklix lies just beyond these mountains.
"But the path is not easy. There are those who would stop us from reaching it." John's heart skipped a beat. "Who?" he asked, his voice laced with concern. "Who would stop us?" Samia's gaze hardened. "There are enemies, those who would see our people wiped from the face of the earth. We've been hunted for too long, but now we are close to reclaiming what was lost. We cannot afford to fail." John felt the shiver run down his spine. The gravity of the situation was starting to sink in. He had thought this journey was merely a way to find out more about the women, about their mysterious past, but now he understood it was much more. It was a mission, one that could shape the future of these women and their people, and perhaps even the world around him. As they climbed higher, the air grew thinner, the mountain paths steeper. John's legs were burning, but he didn't stop. Breaths. He couldn't. Not now. The thought of what lay ahead, the place called Cake, kept him moving forward. He could sense it, a quiet pull deep inside him, telling him that his purpose was tied to this journey, to these women, in ways he had yet to understand. The climb was exhausting, each step feeling heavier than the last. The cliffs loomed above them like silent giants, watching as they ascended. The path became narrower, the rocks slick with moisture, and John had to focus all his energy on keeping his footing. The women, however, seemed unaffected by the difficulty. Samia led the way, her steps sure and confident. The other two women followed closely behind, their expressions focused and determined. Bryant. Finally, after what felt like hours, they reached the top of the mountain pass. John looked out across the valley below, and his breath caught in his chest. The view was breathtaking. The landscape stretched out before him, vast and untamed. The rolling hills, the dense forests, and the rivers winding through the land. It was a world he had never truly seen before. a world that felt both ancient and alive. But it wasn't just the view that took his breath away. It was the sense of something immense, something powerful that hung in the air. He could feel it now, a deep resonance that seemed to pulse from the land itself. It was as if the mountains, the earth, and the sky were all connected in some way he couldn't yet understand.
And in that moment, John knew that this was no ordinary journey.
It was a pilgrimage to something sacred. Mia turned to him, her eyes locking onto his with a seriousness that matched the gravity of the moment. "This is it," she said. "We've reached the first part of the journey. The trials begin now." John's heart raced. "What trials?" he asked. Mia didn't answer immediately. Perhaps. Instead, she motioned for them to follow her.
You will see, she said, her voice low and filled with purpose.
Stay close, and remember, you must not stray from the path. The trials are meant to test you, to test us all.
But they are necessary. Only those who are strong enough can continue. John nodded, his mind spinning with questions, but he didn't speak. He had come this far, and there was no turning back now. The sense of destiny that had been growing inside him for days now felt undeniable. He was part of something larger, something that had been set into motion long before he had ever crossed paths with these women. As they made their way down the other side of the mountain, the landscape began to change once again. The trees grew larger, their trunks twisted and ancient. The air felt thicker, more oppressive, as if the world itself was closing in around them. John could hear the distant sound of rushing water, and he knew they were nearing something important. But Mia turned to him again, her expression unreadable.
We are almost there.
The final trial awaits. John's heart pounded in his chest. He didn't know what to expect, but the journey had already taken him so far beyond anything he could have imagined that he felt ready for whatever came next. The women, though silent, seemed to share that same readiness, that same anticipation. The land itself seemed to hum with energy, as if the very earth was waiting for them to reach their destination. Brace. And as they continued on, John realized something. This wasn't just about the women, or even the place called Kamik. It was about him. It was about what he was meant to do, what role he was meant to play in the strange, unfolding story. The trials ahead would test him, challenge him, and push him to his limits. But in that moment, John knew one thing for sure. He was no longer just a farmer. He was a part of something far greater, and whatever lay ahead, he would face it with the strength of the ancestors who had come before him. The land seemed to pulse with an ancient energy as they pressed forward. John's legs were tired from the long trek, but he barely noticed. The air was thick with anticipation, and the women moved with a quiet confidence, as if they had been preparing for this moment for years. Every step felt like it brought him closer to something important, something far greater than he had ever imagined. Mia led them through the dense woods, the path narrowing as they neared the final trial. The forest seemed alive, the trees whispering in the wind, their branches twisting as though they were trying to tell him something. John could feel the weight of history in the air, the stories of generations past pressing down on him. The weight of his own thoughts also hung heavy in his mind. What was his role in all of this? How did he fit into this mysterious journey, and what would be expected of him? The other two women were quiet, their faces set in determined expressions. They rarely spoke, but John could sense their resolve. They had come this far, and they were not about to turn back now. Mia, however, seemed lost in thought, her gaze fixed on the path ahead, her mind clearly focused on something only she could see. Past. After what felt like hours of walking, they reached a clearing, a vast open space where the trees had thinned, and the sky above was wide and endless. In the center of the clearing stood a large stone structure, ancient and weathered, but still standing strong. It was a monument, a testament to something long forgotten, its surface covered in intricate carvings that John couldn't fully decipher. The stone seemed to hum with energy, and as he stepped closer, he felt the ground beneath him shift, as if the earth itself was reacting to their presence. "This is it," Mia said, her voice steady and filled with reverence. "Person. This is where it all began, and this is where it must end." John stood in awe, taking in the sight of the monument. It was more than just stone. It was a symbol of something ancient, something powerful. It was a reminder of the strength of the women who had come before him, and the legacy that had been lost. And now it was up to them to reclaim it. Samia turned to face him, her eyes searching his face as if she were trying to read his soul. "The final trial is yours to face, John. Best. You must prove that you are ready to join us, ready to embrace what is waiting for you. This place has seen countless generations, and now it will see the return of our people. But it is not just about strength. It is about understanding, about knowing who you truly are." John's heart raced as he looked at the monument. He could feel the weight of her words, the responsibility that had been placed on his shoulders. But there was no turning back now. He had come this far, and he knew that this was his moment, his test. The women had chosen him for a reason, and now it was time for him to prove that he was worthy of the legacy they sought to reclaim. He stepped forward, his heart pounding in his chest. The ground beneath him seemed to tremble as he approached the monument. The air grew thick with energy, and John felt a strange pull, as if the stone itself was calling to him. He placed his hands on the surface of the monument, the cool stone sending a shiver through his fingers. The carvings on the stone seemed to come alive, swirling and shifting, revealing ancient symbols and patterns that he could not understand, but somehow he knew they were significant. Samia stood behind him, her gaze unwavering. "You must unlock the truth," she said softly. "Only then will you be able to join us." John's mind raced as he tried to make sense of the symbols. He didn't know what they meant, but there was something about them that resonated with him on a deep, primal level. He closed his eyes, focusing on the sensation of the stone beneath his hands, allowing the energy to flow through him. The air grew colder, the wind picking up, and for a moment he felt as if he were no longer just a man standing in a forest, but something more. Something connected to the land, to the women, to the legacy that had been lost. The symbols on the stone began to glow, faint at first, then brighter, pulsing with energy. John's heart raced as the light from the stone enveloped him, and in that moment he understood. The legacy of the Apache people wasn't just about blood or history. It was about strength, resilience, and the ability to connect with the world around him. It was about the bond between people and the land, between the past and the future. The light grew brighter, and John felt a surge of power wash over him. It was a feeling like no other, a deep, unshakable strength that came from within. He wasn't just part of this journey. He was part of something much larger, something that had been waiting for him all along. The stone, the land, and the women, they were all connected, and now he was too. The light from the stone faded, leaving John standing alone in the clearing. The monument before him seemed unchanged, but something inside him had shifted. He could feel the connection now, the bond that tied him to this place, to the women, and to their mission. But he had passed the trial, not through brute strength, but through understanding, through connection. Mia stepped forward, her face unreadable, but her eyes filled with something close to approval. "Inspiration. You have done it," she said softly. "You are ready." John stood still, processing everything that had just happened. He had expected something more, something grander, more dramatic. But the truth was simpler than that. It wasn't about the power he had felt or the glowing symbols. It was about the connection. It was about understanding his place in the world, understanding who he was and what he was meant to do. As the other women gathered around him, John realized that this was just the beginning. The journey they had started would not end here, at this monument, but it had laid the foundation for what was to come. They had found the strength to reclaim their legacy, but now they had to fight to restore what was lost. John turned to face the women, his heart full of determination. "What's next?" he asked, his voice steady and sure. Breaths. Tsemea looked at him, a slight smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "Now, we fight. Now we take back what is ours." And with that, John understood. The path ahead was still uncertain, the challenges many, but for the first time, he felt ready. Ready to join the women in their fight, ready to stand with them and face whatever came next.